Mercedes and Max Verstappen's representatives have held talks in recent weeks about a potential future F1 tie-up. So what is the real endgame here? Is this really about Mercedes wanting to make a shock swoop to lure Verstappen away from Red Bull for 2026? Or is it more about the longer term options for 2027 and beyond? Or perhaps is this all just a convenient ploy that helps both parties strengthen negotiating hands elsewhere? Cynics would suggest Mercedes can drive down George Russell's pay demands if he knows someone else is sniffing around his seat, while the Verstappen camp can push up what Red Bull will put on the table to keep its star driver on board if it gets to the point where they need to renegotiate his long-term contract for fear of losing him early. What seems likely is that the motivations from both camps are coming from different directions and they don't want them to be revealed. However, based on what we have learned speaking to sources with good knowledge of the situation, there are some interesting elements that give us a clue about where things may go both over the next few weeks and longer term. The emergence of the talks between Mercedes and Verstappen is fascinating because back in April, Mercedes boss Toto Wolff had ruled out resuming his pursuit of the world champion. He told Sky Sports, "I always say I don't flirt outside if I'm happy in the relationship professionally. I'm super happy with the lineup that we have. I couldn't wish for anything better, and Max is at Red Bull. We haven't had a conversation, we're continuing our trajectory." The fact that discussions have since taken place suggests the situation has changed and that Wolff may be seeking a lineup change after all. But that might not be the case, with one source suggesting to us that rather than these talks being about Wolff trying to make a swoop, they were instead kicked off by an approach from the Verstappen camp wanting to have a chat about the future. If that's the case, it would be logical for Wolff to agree to speak because it's the job of every team boss to talk to every driver's management and to know how things are shaping up in the driver market. This is why Wolff was so open with George Russell about the discussions taking place, because there is no secret plot to grab Verstappen. It also explains the words he chose to use in the press conference at the Austrian Grand Prix. Asked about what had changed based on his remarks earlier in the year where he said he would not be flirting with Verstappen anymore, Wolff said, "Define flirting. No, nothing's changed. There is no flirt in that sense. Depends how you act. You can flirt or you can have conversations." To try to make a bit more sense of that, it would seem that Toto's point is, if you're approached for a chat by someone you are interested in, is that flirting or just being polite? Clearly, Verstappen and his management are weighing up his F1 future. With Red Bull's F1 dominance having been wiped away and question marks over the team's ability to fight at the front with its own power unit next year, the four-time champion is approaching a potential crossroads. In racing terms, the next couple of years could well dictate if he goes on to become the most successful driver in F1 history. With engines set to be so critical to success in the next rule set that kicks off in 2026, being on the wrong side of things with Red Bull could leave Verstappen as purely a supporting actor. Nobody knows right now which manufacturer has done the best job with the new power units, so making a big change into 2026 requires a huge leap of faith. The word in the paddock is that Mercedes appears to be favourite in terms of nailing the new engines, but that will not be proven until the cars hit the track for the first time. Plus, the chassis rules for next year still have plenty in common with the current ground effect formula that Mercedes has found so difficult to get on top of. So it's only once racing starts in 2026 and the true competitive picture of next year's regulations becomes clear that drivers will really know where they need to start trying to force their way into. It's a bit like what we saw in late 2014 when Sebastian Vettel made his shock decision to leave Red Bull for Ferrari and Fernando Alonso decided to bet on McLaren Honda. The smartest move right now for any driver is to have freedom at the end of next year so they can jump ship if their current team is not up to scratch and get themselves into a more competitive car for 2027. That appears to be the game Verstappen is playing, with sources suggesting that any move to another F1 team is unlikely to happen until 2027 at the earliest, so any discussions taking place are more about that. But that does not mean that Red Bull can sit back and think it's guaranteed that Verstappen will stay on for next year. The Verstappens are clearly not happy with the current form of the Red Bull car and want to see improvements made, and will keep ramming that point home to team management. Verstappen's manager Raymond Vermeulen was pretty active in Austria last weekend, being seen in a lengthy chat with Red Bull team boss Christian Horner on Saturday morning, and then being spotted deep in conversation with Red Bull's managing director Oliver Mintzlaff late on Sunday evening. Asked what he wanted to see from Red Bull in the future, Verstappen said, "There are bits coming, but is it enough to challenge McLaren? I'm not sure. Probably not. But I also don't want to sound depressed or whatever. I know that everyone in the team always gives it 100%. The uncertainty about where things are heading for Red Bull, which is increased by its switch to its own engines, is likely to have driven the Mercedes talks just to see how the land lies for the future. It also conveniently reminds Red Bull that it's going to be kept on its toes to make sure it keeps hold of its star asset, because based on the performance of Red Bull's second car so far this year, with 2 different drivers, if Verstappen leaves, this team is nowhere." Naturally, Red Bull team boss Christian Horner played all this down, saying, "We know what the situation is with Max, we know what the contracts are with Max. The rest is all noise that's not coming from here." One left field suggestion that emerged in the Austria paddock was that the main decision Verstappen is likely making for 2026 is not about Red Bull or Mercedes. Instead, it's about whether he races on with Red Bull or steps away from F1 to temporarily do something completely different. This is based on a theory that after 11 years of F1, it's time for a break, especially having just become a father. It's been suggested that this internal debate is what stopped Max wholeheartedly committing to seeing through his Red Bull contract when it was discussed last weekend. Asked about being at Red Bull in 2026, he said, "I don't think we need to talk about that. I don't know. Do you want me to repeat what I said last year? I don't know. It's the same answer. I don't even remember what I said last year, really. But again, it's not really on my mind. Just driving well, trying to push the performance, and then we focus on next year." Plus, there have been more indications recently of Verstappen getting frustrated with some of the soap opera elements of F1. One example was the repeated questioning he faced about his risk of getting banned after accumulating 11 points on his licence. After being probed yet again in a Thursday press conference in Austria, Verstappen said, "You're joking. Is this like a trap? I'm getting this question every single time, every weekend." Stepping away from F1 for a bit would stop a lot of these off-track annoyances, and there's probably no better time to do it than now. With the 2026 rules being such a reset and likely to rip up the form book and the current competitive order between the teams, being on the sidelines to see how it all plays out to work out where you need to be for 2027 has some logic to it. There is also some evidence that a spark has been lit inside Verstappen as a result of the expanded program of his own Verstappen.com racing team. We have already seen him or Franz Hermann testing at the Nürburgring Nordschleife, and he was out again at Spa ahead of the Spa 24 Hours, which he preferred to do over attending the F1 movie premiere in New York to help his team with setup work and car development. He has talked of wanting to do major races like the Nürburgring 24 Hours in the future and wanting to get ahead on his preparation for that so he doesn't have to start from scratch further down the line. And in a very telling remark in the wake of his early exit from the Austrian GP, Verstappen said he didn't follow the rest of the F1 race too much as he was watching the Spa 24 Hours. With so many things up in the air, this is unlikely to be resolved imminently, especially because there are contract option dates that need to come into play. It's known that Verstappen has a performance clause in his current Red Bull contract that runs through to 2028, although the exact details of this have not been made public. But even based on the 2 versions that have the most credibility, that to trigger his exit, Verstappen needs to be either outside the top 2 in the Drivers' Championship or outside the top 3 by a point before the summer break, most likely the end of July, right now that moment has not been reached. Plus, if the contract exit clause only kicks in if he is outside the top 3 in the standings, that may well not happen at all. He's 3rd in the championship right now, so much will depend on if 4th placed Russell, of all people, can close him down. From Mercedes' perspective, the likelihood remains that it will do a deal with Russell for 2026, but where the pay stacks up and how long the contract is for appear to be the elements that are not defined yet. The mini summer break between the British Grand Prix and the doubleheader in Belgium and Hungary would be the perfect point to get things over the line. Should the Verstappens be indicating that they are leaning towards being free agents for 2027, then it would be logical for Mercedes to keep its options open and ensure that it does not let an opportunity to sign the best driver on the grid fall to someone else like Aston Martin. Wolff is clear that there will not be months of waiting around to see what Verstappen does, nor does he want to keep Russell on tenterhooks. There is a clear timeline set out in his head. He said he wants to be respectful to everyone involved in the process, and it would be sadistic to make a driver wait too long for a decision, and he predicts that everything will be worked out before the August break. But what's clear right now is that a driver market story that looked like it had been put to bed earlier this year is now firmly back in play.